the hour. This is NBC News Now. We are coming on the air with breaking news. The Attorney General, Merrick Garland, finally addressing that search at former President Trump's home, saying he wants to unseal the warrant that led to that search, also defending his decision and his agencies as there is new attack against the FBI in Ohio. What we're hearing from all angles tonight as we cover all angles. Plus some good news at the gas pump. The average cost per gallon nationwide now under $4 a gallon, but there are signs it may not last. What we're hearing from AAA today. And even as gas prices drop, groceries, rent, housing all remain high. Wages not keeping up. And tonight's original, people working 2 jobs without their employers knowing it. Then at least 3 people are dead after an explosion destroyed dozens of homes in southern Indiana. Dramatic video as we're learning more about how that community is trying to help the displaced families. And new COVID guidance today from the CDC. Listen up. Big changes as kids start to head back to school, while you may not have to quarantine after exposure. That will be later in the show. Good day, I'm Tom Costello in for Hallie, and we have an awful lot going on today. In just the last couple of hours, we're finally hearing from the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, who says the Department of Justice is asking a federal judge to unseal the search warrant carried out by the FBI at the home, the Florida home of former President Trump. Garland has faced enormous pressure to address this, not just from Republicans, but also, according to 2 sources, from within his ranks at the Department of Justice. The AG saying he personally approved the search and that, quote, no one is above the law.
Upholding the rule of law means applying the law evenly, without fear or favor. Under my watch, that is precisely what the Justice Department is doing.
Okay, well, the motion to unseal the warrant reads, quote, the public's clear and powerful interest in understanding what occurred under these circumstances weighs heavily in favor of unsealing. The former president, in a statement, insists his lawyers were cooperating fully, accusing the DOJ of getting way ahead of themselves with the search. Trump is not saying whether he or not his team will fight this motion. The warrant, they have until 3 p.m. tomorrow to decide. It's all big news, and it comes as we're learning from a source familiar with the situation that the former president received a subpoena in the spring for documents the FBI believed he had in his possession, but were not turned over to the National Archives. Multiple sources say those documents were the reason for this search. As a reminder, it's one of several investigations that Mr. Trump faces right now against him, his businesses, or his actions around his false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. It wasn't. All as we follow news out of Ohio today, a man fired into an FBI field office with a nail gun. Ohio Highway Patrol officers say that they gave chase. It ensued before he got into a standoff with police, exchanging gunfire. That suspect is not in custody yet, and no word on a potential motive. And it comes just as the FBI director, Christopher Wray, is calling out a spike in violent threats against agents just since Monday's search.
Any threats made against law enforcement, including the men and women of the FBI, as with any law enforcement agency, are deplorable and dangerous.
So a lot happening. We're going to get to Barbara McQuade and Von Hilyard in just a moment, but we start with NBC Justice correspondent Ken Delanian. And Ken, this request to unseal, it's just for the warrant and the inventory, not the affidavit of probable cause, right? Explain what this means.
That's right, Tom, and that's a really important distinction that a lot of people missed because Garland was talking about the public's right to know. The public is not going to learn when these documents are unsealed the FBI's justification for this search, what they told the judge their probable cause was, whether they had confidential sources, what the basis was. That document will remain sealed. The DOJ is not asking to unseal that. What they're asking to unseal is the warrant, which is usually like a 1-page document that shows a list of statutes that are implicated and is signed by the magistrate, and the inventory of the search, the list of things seized, which actually in this matter could be quite revelatory depending on how detailed the FBI is is with their labeling of it. And both of these documents, by the way, are documents that that Donald Trump and his lawyers already have, at least according to typical DOJ procedures. So they're important to have. Trump could have released them at any time. They may shed some light on things, but they're not going to give us the full picture of why the Justice Department decided to take this step, Tom.
Yeah, I think what the point you just made is critical. The former president could have released these on his own if he felt that in any way they were exculpatory, right? If they cleared him in any way. Garland was very clear here, not just in defending the decision for the warrant, but defending the FBI and that office.
That's right, Tom. And this was a bit of a put up or shut up move. Garland's move here was essentially to say, you've been criticizing us and saying that we're acting politically and that this search was unjustified, yet you haven't released this warrant and this inventory that you have. Well, we're going to move to unseal it. Go ahead and oppose us if you want. That'll send a message in and of itself. And in fairness, the DOJ must believe that these documents will be somewhat revelatory in terms of whether they have references to classified information, what laws are implicated, that they will show that the DOJ had a basis to do this. But of course, we'll just have to wait and see what the documents say, Tom.
So the bottom line is the Attorney General is kind of daring the Trump team, right? If you're okay with us releasing the documents, then we'll release the documents and we'll see whether the Trump team goes forward. You also have a very big portfolio of beats. You also have more information about the threat that the FBI is under right now, details about online threats.
Yeah, that's right. I spoke to a former DHS official named Brian Murphy, who is with an open source intelligence firm that is tracking threats, and they have seen a huge uptick in credible, specific, violent threats against both FBI personnel and FBI facilities. And Murphy said he'd never seen anything like this in his 20-plus year career as an intelligence analyst, specifically directed at the FBI since the search at Mar-a-Lago. And of course, we've had this incident today. We don't know whether it's related, but where a man with a nail gun and an AR-15 walked into an FBI field office in Cincinnati, fired at law enforcement personnel, was chased out of there, and then was the subject of an armed standoff, exchanging gunfire with law enforcement officers on the highway there in Ohio, Tom.
All right, Ken, and we should remind the audience that since January 6th, the FBI takes all of these threats very seriously. Ken, thank you. Let's move on now to our former U.S. attorney and NBC News legal analyst, Barbara McQuade. Barbara, it's great to get your perspective. The DOJ's move now to unseal the search warrant, Garland is basically putting this ball back in the former president's court, right? Saying, go ahead, file an appeal if you'd like. We can release this information.
Yeah, in fact, in the motion itself, it says we would like the court to unseal this motion unless the president objects. And so, they really show that they are being forthcoming here, and that the only reason it would not be released is if the president has some objection. The judge has ordered that they work that out and they notify the court whether the former president objects by 3 p.m. tomorrow. So I think in short order, this document is going to be in the public domain, unless, of course, Donald Trump wants to stop it for some reason. And I think that's not going to be a good look for him. So I do agree strategically this was a good move. I think the other reason this was such a good move is that Merrick Garland, I think, was chosen for this job to restore norms to the Department of Justice. And so for him to come out and violate those norms by talking about this case, I think was just a non-starter for him. But he found a way to both speak and adhere to that policy by saying we speak through our court documents. So we have filed a court document, a motion to unseal, and then all the world can see what the search warrant says and what the list of documents says.
So Barbara, what are the options that the Trump team right now has?
Well, they really have two choices. They can either agree and let this thing get out there in the public domain, or they can fight it and argue that there's some privacy reason or other reason that would prevent, that they would be harmful to Donald Trump. I think he's unlikely to win anyway, and so I think fighting that fight and losing it would be a bad look for him. Now, if he thought it would, in order to his benefit, to release this information, he would have done that on Monday, because this is the information, these are documents he gets at the time of the search. So there's some reason he didn't want to disclose it. Perhaps it's because there's a long list of classified information there that they wheeled away. But I think he's got to make a choice whether to fight or not. I think he's unlikely to win the fight, so I predict he does not.
Well, listen, I think you just made the most important point right there. He may not want the public to know what it is that the FBI took out of Mar-a-Lago, because it may suggest, in fact, he was holding on to information or documents that he shouldn't have, that no private citizen should have, right? So that, therefore, would undermine his outrage that he's creating.
I think that's right. In fact, it almost demonstrates his guilt because the crime is just possessing these things willfully. And we know that the Justice Department have been trying to get this stuff back since January. There's reporting today that they even used an intermediary step of using a subpoena to get it. And it was just his downright refusal that forced them to go in, get a warrant, and just take them. And so the fact that they're there, if it's on the list, that here are all the documents that we took out of there, and these are documents that belong to the government, and if they're even classified, I mean, it's as good as, as an indictment to see that warrant.
Hey, Barbara, just one last one, and this is quick. Given the overall disposition of Merrick Garland today, is there any doubt in your mind that he weighed every single option here and was convinced that the public's need to have the FBI go in there far outweighed the risk to the agency and his own reputation?
Yeah, I'm sure they thought about this. They've probably been thinking about this for the past few days, probably even before this warrant was filed, but realized that the important thing to do here was to assure the public and to protect the safety of the members of the FBI.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbara. Nice to hear your thoughts. Barbara McQuade. All right, NBC's Vaughn Hilyard standing by in Palm Beach, Florida. Vaughn, we talked yesterday about this. A source from the Trump team told you that they wanted to put the ball in the DOJ's court, and now that's happening, right? So do we expect that the Trump team will agree to go ahead and let these documents be revealed to the public?
Right, Tom, you're absolutely right. That source familiar with the matter from the Trump side of this said that the burden of transparency lied with the Department of Justice. 24 hours later here this afternoon, the Department of Justice, they throw it right back to them here in Mar-a-Lago. Now, it's going to be at 3 p.m. tomorrow that Trump's counsel has the timeline in order to get back to the DOJ and say whether they intend to fight the motion to unseal the warrant as well as the property receipt of what was taken from the Mar-a-Lago basement where these materials were being held here. And I think it's important to note the political end of this here. You know, over the last 48, 72 hours, you heard Republicans line up one after the other, calling on the Department of Justice to explain its reasoning for this search warrant execution here. You know, even the likes of Ted Cruz tweeting, quote, in all caps, "Release the warrant now. The American people deserve to see it now." He directed that tweet to the Attorney General and the FBI Director. Well, here on this Thursday afternoon, they've done just that. Ultimately, it's going to be left here into the Trump team's hands of whether they opt to fight it or not. And I think the other big development here this afternoon, Tom, was the lead up to this. Just about an hour before this press conference, we found out that there had actually been a subpoena issued to Trump's office here in Florida this spring. And it was a June 3rd meeting in which Trump and his counsel turned over additional material and documents as part of this subpoena. Ultimately, it's clear the Department of Justice did not find it sufficient what had been returned to them in June and ultimately executed the search warrant.
That's another important point. NBC's Vaughn Hilyard on the ground there in Palm Beach, Florida. Vaughn, thanks very much for your reporting as well. All right, let's talk about some good news right now. It's on gas. The national average is under $4 a gallon for the first time since March. That's just a penny or so, but it's still a drop of more than $1 since that peak back in mid-June, 501 back then. And the folks at AAA tell me that can have a major impact on simply the psyche of Americans.
Gasoline has a great psychological impact because you see the price everywhere. It's on these giant neon signs on almost every corner. They know the price of gas because it's in their face every day.
And people have been cutting back on driving. Falling gas prices are a major boost to President Biden, who's had to fight skyrocketing inflation ahead of the midterms. But there is a catch on how long this drop may last. And that's because on the supply side, the president's decision to tap into the nation's petroleum reserves for 1 million barrels a day, that ends in October. And AAA is warning hurricane season could really hurt supply. On the demand side, people are changing their habits. Gas Buddy says Americans spending $400 million a day less in August than they were in June, and folks are feeling the pinch.
I have 3 kids, so it's very hard to buy gas and pay for food and everything right now.
Nothing we could do about it.
We need gas.
I think it should go back down to two something a gallon.
That'd be nice, to something a gallon. We're going to break this all down now with CNBC's Pippa Stevens. So, Pippa, if we can put on the screen another factor here, diesel prices, right? Still above $5 a gallon. You and I may not drive diesel cars or trucks, but listen, the slower than regular gas. And when truck drivers get hurt, the supply chain gets hurt, right?
Yeah, that's right, Tom. Diesel is often called the workhorse of the economy since it powers trucks, trains, barges, and those prices ran up much more quickly than regular gasoline and are also easing at a slower rate. And this is a key part of the inflation story in the overall economy because demand for goods has surged out of the pandemic, which drives up diesel prices, which ultimately comes back to the consumer in the form of higher prices for everything, including food. If it costs more to transport that, we will see those price rises at the grocery market.
All right, well, let's talk about the price of crude because it closed today at about $94 a barrel, I believe, which is pretty close to prices we saw just before the war in Ukraine. Can we expect oil prices to stay below $100?
Well, WTI, which is the U.S. oil benchmark, is up 6% over the last week. So it has been moving a little bit higher here. And longer term fears around whether or not there's going to be a global slowdown have really been a driving force behind these recent declines. But there are several catalysts that could push oil higher in the coming months. As you noted, the release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is set to end this fall. There's also the ongoing sanctions against Russian energy, which will be implemented later this year. So there are a lot of factors that could ultimately push those gas prices higher once again.
Okay, but any long-term solutions here? Anything on the horizon that may keep prices at $4 or below?
Well, nothing is short term when it comes to the energy market because these are a lot of very complicated industries. And the rapid increase that we've seen is really due to structural issues in the market. So probably nothing here in the short term, Tom.
Pippa Stevens at CNBC. Thank you, Pippa. All right, parents, listen up. Alert. The CDC is out with new COVID recommendations today for all of us, but it comes as millions of students start heading back to the classroom. The big change for the schools, the CDC no longer recommending that schools do routine daily testing. And it is also ending the test to stay recommendation for students exposed to COVID. The updated guidance also says instead of quarantining, if you are exposed to COVID-19, wear a high-quality mask for 10 days, get tested after the 5th day. And the CDC no longer recommending that you should stay at least 6 feet away from other people to reduce the risk of exposure. All of this comes as COVID cases continue to decline across the country, down 17% over the last 2 weeks. The U.S. also saw fewer deaths in the last 14 days. Dr. John Torres joins us now. John, boy, you can forgive people for being confused, right? The CDC, though, says 95% of Americans have had COVID-19 or been vaccinated against it. And yet we're still in a pandemic. So what should we be making of these new guidelines?
And you're right, Tom. These new guidelines can be a bit confusing. But what the CDC is trying to do is clarify some of that confusion by giving us a bit clarification on the guidelines they've had all along throughout the pandemic. And the big changes here, like you mentioned, are some of the school changes, especially changes when it comes to isolation, what to do after isolation. And like you see right here in the graphic, they're saying if you were exposed to it, whether you're vaccinated or not, they want you to watch for symptoms for 10 days, wear a well-fitting mask around others inside for 10 days. You want to test on day 5 after you're exposed. If you're positive, obviously you go into isolation. If you're negative, you continue to take precautions for 10 days. That's for everybody, including school children. Instead of that test to stay policy they had in the past where somebody was exposed, now they're saying follow the regular guidelines. Let's go ahead and have you wear a well-fitting mask at school. You can still participate, which is important for school-aged children, especially as they start going back, and take that test at day 5. If you're positive, then you might need to stay home and isolate. And they're giving some isolation rules as well. Same thing we had before, which is isolate through day 5. If you start getting better, if you are fever-free for 24 hours, then you can go out and about, just wear a well-fitting mask. But they do say you can stop wearing a mask if you test negative at day 6 and day 8. That gives you a couple extra days without a mask if you want to. But hopefully they're clarifying these a little bit more. They're making them more generalized for everybody. And instead of doing the vaccinated versus unvaccinated or other categories, they're kind of doing it across the board, Tom.
You know, we just had a close call in my family. My daughter, who's an intensive care nurse, got COVID, and, you know, she masked up and quarantined for about 7 or 8, 9 days. And so now these new guidelines come out, and you can understand why we're confused, schools are confused. So how should schools be interpreting all of this? How should they handle all of this? How do they stay on top of all of this information? It seems to change by the week.
And dig down deep in these guidelines, because one of the things they do mention is look at your community levels. If they're low, then go with these guidelines as they're stated up in the beginning. But if they start getting to the high category, then you might need to pull back. You might need to start some of the mitigation measures we've had in the past. So it's going to depend on your community. They do emphasize ventilations in schools, so make sure schools are ventilated. That's an important thing. And then follow what's going on as far as what happens if there's an exposure, what children can do there and what other children can do. So, again, I think these are great rules. I think it does clarify to a certain extent. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. CDC.gov for more information. Dr. John Torres, thank you very much. To Indiana now. Investigators said just a short while ago that 15 families are displaced after a house explosion in the southern part of the state. 3 people were killed, at least 39 homes damaged. This happened yesterday afternoon. The moment of the house exploding caught on camera. Very dramatic video. The destruction stretched across a city block, flying 100 feet in each direction. Firefighters say there are no other victims. Rescuers could not fully search the area until today because it was simply too dangerous. Investigators still aren't sure what caused the explosion. Witnesses nearby say it felt like an earthquake with debris falling from the sky like snow. NBC's Jesse Kirsch is on the ground there in Evansville, Indiana. Jesse, last night the ATF surveyed the site of the explosion. What more do we know about what they found, and what are investigators looking for?
Yeah, well, Tom, from the ATF specifically, they've just told us that they're assisting local officials. You mentioned that we don't know what the cause is. What we believe it to not be is a gas leak. The utility and the fire department briefed us a short time ago, and they say that it does not appear that there is a natural gas leak that spurred this. And I asked the fire chief what else could cause something like this to happen accidentally, because at this point they do believe, based on their initial findings in the investigation, that this was an accidental event. And they're still working on an answer to that question. You talk about people in the immediate vicinity feeling the impact here. Tom, it wasn't just right here. Glass blew out of that building. This building behind us here, the man who owns this business says that he felt in that building as if a truck was ramming into the building. And there were people 2 miles away at a business that told our producer Will earlier that they felt and heard the aftermath of this explosion. So this thing clearly had wide-ranging ramifications, and it seems like it's kind of remarkable, honestly, that only 3 people were killed. Unfortunately, 3 lives were lost here, but it seems like it could have been much worse. The mayor telling us this road behind us where this happened is a high traffic area. And on that surveillance video that we've been watching, Tom, in the moments just before the explosion, there were several cars that go by that house. So you can imagine how much worse this could have been if people were stopped in traffic out there.
We just a moment ago showed a photograph of 2 people who we believe were the victims. Do you know any more about them?
Yeah, so we have been in touch with the mother of the man who was killed. His mother says that he and his wife unfortunately died, and she is, she is, however, taking some level of comfort in the fact that they were together when they passed away here. So that is what one family is holding on to here as they deal with a very tough situation. We know a 4th person was injured, and 15 families right now, according to the fire department at Last Word, are displaced, getting help from the Red Cross, Tom.
Police and ATF still on the ground 24 hours later. Jesse, thank you very much for that. All right, now to the climate. We're just learning today that the fast warming of the Arctic, a key sign of climate change, is happening even faster than previously thought. Research teams in Finland say that region has been heating up to 4 times faster than the global average just over the past 40 years. That's more than 2 to 3 times faster than usually reported. Some scientists say this can impact weather like rainfall or the heat waves we've seen this summer. Europe is going through one right now. This is France. Look at this, where they're also having major wildfires in the southwestern region of the country. Temperatures hitting 104 today. In the UK, an extreme heat warning is now in place. And of course, here in the United States, our average overnight temperatures last month, the hottest in U.S. history. Meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now to talk about all of this. Bill, can we start with the Arctic? It's heating up faster than previously described. Some places north of Russia and Norway heating up to 7 times faster than the global average. So talk about what this means.
Yeah, we safely for the last couple of decades were saying maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times what we're having in the mid-latitudes. So let me explain why it's so important what's happening in the Arctic and in the Antarctic. So we call this Arctic amplification. So the Arctic Ocean is actually big. Like the North Pole, there's no land. That's the ocean. So, but it's covered with ice. That's why you don't think of it like that. And so all of the ice that's up in this region reflects the sun. And it's just like, you know, if you have a black shirt on, you feel the sun more than if you had a white shirt. It's the same exact concept, and it's called albedo. So the ice and snow reflect the solar energy back into space. When we keep melting that, then it's less that's being reflected back into space, and the dark ocean water absorbs more, and then it warms up more, and then more snow and ice melts. So here's where we are currently. We're just about at our summer minimum right now. This is where we currently have snow and ice at the North Pole right now, inside the Arctic Circle. And every year this continues to shrink a little bit more, and then eventually, some people say, you know, decades or 100 years from now, we may have very little, if any, snow and ice. And of course, we worry about Greenland too, because that is snow and ice that's on land, and if that melts, that goes into the oceans, and that's why we're expecting the oceans to rise. So here's the ice extent, Tom, as we go throughout the last reliable period we call from 1979 to current, and you can see that downward trend. This is a negative feedback loop in the Arctic.
Yeah, it's really discouraging. Europe is also right now in the furnace, right? The heat seems to have let up slightly here in the United States. But what are we looking at weather-wise over the next few days in Europe or also here in the States?
Yeah, I'll show you Europe first, then I'll bring it back home for the weekend forecast. And this is not the heat wave of July, you know, when record-setting, unheard of. But the duration of this one is almost unheard of. You know, London's going to have a chance for 5 days in a row in the 90s. You know, areas of France are going to be in the 90s. We just showed you some of the pictures of the fires going on. So it's the duration of this heat wave, which is very unusual, especially for the United Kingdom. Now, in the U.S., this is what so many people were waiting for, especially in the Ohio Valley, in the Northeast, this refreshing dome of air coming in from Canada. We can thank our Canadian friends for that. But there's no relief in the heartland. They're not going to get that nice, cool Canadian air. 98 in Denver tomorrow, 98 in Wichita, Oklahoma still in the 90s, and it's only going to get hotter as we go throughout the upcoming weekend. Dallas, 98 Saturday, back into the hundreds on Sunday and Monday. Houston, it'll be warm and humid for you. So you get the idea, Tom. Although a lot of people in the East are going to be celebrating what will be a beautiful summer weekend, we're not all in this together. The middle of the country is still waiting for a break.
You know what? We're going to have you back in January, and we'll be complaining then, too, but yes, it'll be different, right? All right. Bill, thank you very much. Thanks. Bill Cairns. All right, coming up, it looks like your shipping holiday package costs really are going to go up this year. Exactly how much in the next 5 things we're going to tell you about. Plus, the changes Meta is making after Facebook faced backlash for turning over messages between a mother and her daughter. You may recall that. They're now charged over an abortion. So stay with us. Back at you now, and today Facebook announced it is expanding encryption services after its parent company Meta got a lot of heat over a story that we told you about last night. It's about a mother and a daughter in Nebraska whose Facebook messages were turned over to police as part of an investigation into an illegal abortion. Now, just to be clear, this all happened before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. But it's a situation that abortion rights advocates say will only get worse as more and more states look to restrict abortion access. Meta says the feature was in the works before the controversy. Blaine Alexander has more.
Social media titan Meta, the parent company of Facebook, is under fire after it turned over Facebook messages between a Nebraska teen and her mother as part of a criminal investigation into an illegal abortion. According to court documents, prosecutors say Celeste Burgess, then 17 years old, took abortion pills obtained by her mother, Jessica Burgess. Court documents lay out a string of Facebook messages between the two, including instructions on taking the pills. Now, both mother and daughter face multiple charges related to concealing a death, mishandling human remains, giving false information, and, for the elder Burgess, illegal abortion. Her attorney declined to comment. Prosecutors say at the time the teen was 29 weeks pregnant. In Nebraska, abortion is legal up to 20 weeks.
These tech companies are in a very difficult position, yet they are compelled by the law to turn over this information when they're subpoenaed.
Meta is now facing backlash online, with one user writing, "This is how it begins. One by one, we will lose privacy and freedom. Disgusting and unacceptable." The investigation and the warrant came weeks before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, but experts say it could become a new reality as tech companies navigate questions of privacy and policing in a post-Roe society. In a statement, Meta responded to the criticism, writing, "Nothing in the valid warrants we received mentioned abortion," noting that the warrants related to illegally handling remains of a stillborn baby, not a decision to have an abortion.
Do you expect that we will see more cases like this?
Yes, as these abortion bans hit the books, as law enforcement starts to investigate, they are going to be requesting location data, message history from all sorts of companies, not just Facebook.
He says the overturning of Roe puts many tech companies in uncharted territory.
I think it creates an opportunity for them to start rethinking how much of that data they want to store, what they want to collect, and where they can kind of minimize the data that they're collecting.
And NBC's Blaine Alexander joins us now. So, Blaine, can you help us understand this? How exactly does this new move from Meta aim to protect users?
Well, Tom, what it does is it expands the messages that can be encrypted. Essentially, it means that if you're using Messenger on your phone, and let's say that you switch to a new phone or you upload those messages to the cloud, the previous way is that those messages are no longer encrypted. But with this new change, it means that those messages will become encrypted. Now, there are a few limitations that we need to point out. One, you have to opt into that encryption. Two, it only works on your phone. It doesn't work if you're using Messenger on your desktop. And then you also can't use them with business profiles or professional or high profile, famous profiles, essentially.
So this encrypted chat update is just right now in the testing phase. When might this change become something that users can really opt for?
You know, Meta's not giving a date. They're saying that right now it is still in the testing phase. But all of this entire story is really just kind of opening and strengthening this debate, not just when it comes to Facebook messages and Meta, but just across the tech atmosphere when it comes to encrypting messages. I've spoken with a couple of experts about this around this story, and they say, yes, it is true that when you have encryption, there are dark things that can happen. That's certainly no question. But they say the vast majority of people really just want privacy when it comes to their messages, and that's why they say that these options are good for the vast majority of people who use these social media apps.
NBC's Blaine Alexander on the story. Thank you, Blaine. We want to get you now over to the 5 things that our team thinks you probably should know about tonight. Number 1, the U.S. Postal Service will hike shipping prices for this year's peak holiday season to help cover extra handling costs. The cost to send commercial priority mail packages will go up 75 cents. Long-distance deliveries could increase up to $6.50. If approved, the price increase would start on October 2nd, and it would last until January 22nd of next year. Number 2, Disney Plus is also raising prices. Starting in December, it's going to offer a $7.99 option that comes with commercials. Right now, that cost of Disney Plus is what $7.99 gets you, but it's without ads. Now, the new ad-free version is going up to $10.99. The increase is just for U.S.-based subscribers. Disney says it's doing this to try to make its streaming business profitable. Number 3, police in Brazil. All right, listen to this. Police in Brazil say an elderly woman's daughter was part of an odd plot to swindle her out of more than $143 million worth of art, jewelry, and money. They say she did it by using a group of supposed psychics who claimed that the paintings were cursed. Police say the suspects physically threatened the older woman, and she eventually notified police. The woman's daughter and some of her alleged accomplices have now been arrested. Number 4, a new Pew Research Center survey found Facebook's popularity has actually plummeted among younger users. Back in 2015, Pew found that more than 70% of teens ages 13 to 17 were on Facebook. Now just 32% are on it. And they're not just flocking to newer apps, though. The most popular platform for the age group is actually YouTube. A spokesperson for Meta did not immediately return a request for comment. All right, number 5, the best time to see one of the best meteor showers of the year is going to be tonight into tomorrow morning. viewers will see something like 60 to 100 meteors per hour when this is all going through. Now, this is called the Perseid meteor, and that shower will be at its peak. But a full moon might hurt your chances, rather, of seeing anything at all. If it's clear enough, though, experts say look to the northeast in the sky. All right, when we come back, we go to Cincinnati for new developments in this pretty much all-day standoff we've been following between law enforcement and a suspect who shot into an FBI building. So stay with us. All right, let's get back now to our top story on that warrant at former President Trump's Florida home. His legal team has until 3 p.m. tomorrow to respond to Attorney General Merrick Garland's motion to unseal the document after the AG defended the decision and his agency. And the FBI is saying it is rather seen more violent threats against agents since the search. We are seeing one threat play out in Ohio after a man armed with an AR-15 style rifle attacked an FBI building in Cincinnati with a nail gun. There was a chase. Shots were fired along an interstate. The Ohio State Patrol says the suspect is contained, but not in custody. So far, nobody has been hurt. Shaquille Brewster is outside the FBI field office in Cincinnati. Shaq, no word on motive yet, but we're learning that the standoff has at least concluded right now. Is that right?
That's exactly right, Tom. The standoff has concluded, but notably no word on the condition of that suspect, whether that man is still alive or if he's been captured. But we do know that standoff, that was an hours-long standoff, has now concluded according to local law enforcement. We do expect an update to come within the next couple of minutes here, so we'll get more details there. But as we know it, and we pieced together 3 different statements that we've been receiving from multiple law enforcement agencies, the FBI telling us that this started about 9:15 this morning when that suspect walked into the visitor screening center over there, produced that nail gun, fired it at personnel, according to 2 law enforcement officials. That's what they're telling NBC News. That's when we know that an alarm of some sort went off. That man was then confronted by FBI agents and produced AR-15 style weapon before taking off, fleeing from this scene. He was then spotted by state troopers. A pursuit was underway for about 16 minutes, and then that's when that standoff began. Officials say that he got out the car, gunfire was exchanged with officers, and for hours it was a contained scene where they knew where he was, but it was a lockdown. It was a standoff that we saw there. So officials again saying that standoff has now ended, but we don't know the specific condition of that suspect. They did say that he was injured in some way, but his specific condition at this point is still unknown, Tom.
All right, and the FBI director just said that threats against law enforcement have risen since Monday's search warrant on Mar-a-Lago. What do we now know? Is there any connection that we know of between this suspect, the events today, and what happened to Mar-a-Lago?
At this point, no word on the motive. From officials, there's no description of any motive. There's no connection that they are making at this point. But we do know, and you mentioned that we heard from the FBI director yesterday, he condemned those threats that we've been hearing against FBI, against local law enforcement. You also heard from Attorney General Merrick Garland today defend the integrity of law enforcement officials and the FBI. And then we're also seeing the statement. We'll pull it up on screen right now. This comes from the association over many of the law enforcement agencies. You see the threats made recently contribute to an atmosphere where some have or will accept violence against law enforcement as appropriate. It is not trying to pull it out of that political conversation that we're seeing right now. So we'll expect to get a little bit more from local law enforcement later today, but as we know it, there's no motive that we're aware of.
All right, Shaq, thanks very much. NBC's Shaq Brewster in Cincinnati. Coming up, Atlanta rapper Young Thug is facing new gang charges. We're going to have more on that coming up in the local. Plus, New Hampshire police say a search for a missing girl is now a homicide investigation. What prosecutors are saying about that case after the break. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton is speaking out to NBC News after the DOJ revealed there was an Iranian plot to kill him. Bolton tells NBC's Andrea Mitchell he's glad the case has gone public.
One thing I can say for certain, they're not going to silence me because of it. And I hope people really have a chance to understand the nature of this threat more fully. We'll tell them the nature of the regime we're dealing with.
The DOJ says a 45-year-old Iranian national is accused of offering $300,000 for Bolton's assassination, probably in retaliation for the killing of a key commander in Iran's Revolutionary Guard back in 2020. Other news now. NBC covers hundreds of stories each day, and because you can't possibly read, watch, or listen to all of them, our bureau teams have broken it all down for you and for me. So this is what they're telling us is going down in their regions. It's a segment we call The Local. Let's go to our Midwest bureau. Authorities in Michigan say a cleaning service employee was arrested after allegedly killing a co-worker during a dispute at a General Motors assembly plant overnight. Police did not provide exact details on what happened, specifically on who the victim was or how he or she was killed. GM says it canceled production at the plant today, and it is working with authorities on the investigation. From our West Coast Bureau, a model on the OnlyFans platform has been arrested in Hawaii months after her boyfriend's stabbing death in Miami. Hawaii police say she will be extradited to Miami-Dade, where she will face a second-degree murder charge. The woman's lawyer says that she acted in self-defense. The lawyer for the boyfriend's family said the charge was a relief for them. From our Southeast Bureau, Atlanta rapper Young Thug is facing 6 new felony charges in a gang-related indictment filed last week. The rapper, whose real name is Jeffrey Williams, was originally indicted back in May on charges centered around an alleged gang that prosecutors say was started by Williams and 2 others. Williams' attorney told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that Mr. Williams has committed absolutely no crimes. A trial date is set for January. Police in New Hampshire today announced that the disappearance of a then 5-year-old girl, Harmony Montgomery, 3 years ago, is now a homicide investigation. Police say they are still searching for her remains. She was last seen in Manchester back in late 2019, then in the custody of her father and stepmother. Police searched their home in December of 2021 and January of this year. And on January 4th, Harmony's father was arrested, in part on second-degree assault charges from when he gave her a black eye back in 2019. Police searched the home again in June, just 1 week after Harmony's family celebrated what would have been her 8th birthday. Joining us now is George Solis for NBC News. George, talk to us about what led police to change this from a disappearance case to a murder case.
Yeah, Tom, today officials saying it was the work of local police, the FBI, and the U.S. Marshal Service, investing more than 1,000 hours of manpower going through evidence and following leads to ultimately determine that little Harmony Montgomery was likely murdered around December 2019. That's roughly the last time she was seen. As you mentioned, officials today also with the difficult task of announcing that they have not yet found her body, but that they did find biological evidence that unfortunately led them to this tragic conclusion.
And George, do they have any leads on a suspect, or it sounds like maybe we're led to believe that family members would be suspects?
Yeah, Tom, if police know, they aren't officially saying, because this is now a homicide investigation. Officials today not taking any questions, but they did reaffirm that they are committed to finding the person or persons responsible for this little girl's death. Tom?
Let's talk quickly about how New Hampshire officials have recommended really broad changes to how they handle child welfare cases because of this case, right? And today police mentioned that the system failed her. Where was the breakdown?
Yeah, Tom, and officials today making note of that people have questions. They themselves have questions and concerns about how all of this played out. We should note that the Office of the Child Advocate in Massachusetts conducted its own independent investigation into the child welfare of little Harmony Montgomery, only to find that it wasn't just one bad call, but a series of bad calls that ultimately put this child in situations she should have never been put in. And of course, right now the concern is trying to find her body and bring some closure to this community and this family that is definitely hurting after this announcement today. Tom?
NBC's George Solis on the story. George, thank you very much. Other news, Scott Peterson is back in a San Francisco court today trying to get a new trial for the 2002 murder of his pregnant wife, Lacey Peterson, and their unborn son, Connor. Now, his lawyers claim that essentially one juror was biased against Peterson from the start. In closing arguments, his attorneys say a juror in the trial did not reveal that she was herself a victim of domestic abuse. And if they had known that, they would not have let her sit on the case in the first place. It is a story and a case that made national headlines at the time. Peterson has been in prison since he was convicted of the murders back in 2004. Lacey Peterson's family have declined so far NBC's request for comment. Still to come, millions of Americans are working remotely, and for some of them, that flexibility has let them work yet another full-time job. We're talking about people who consider themselves overemployed. That's next in our original. All right, we are all about original reporting here, and in today's original in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. We've been talking about inflation, of course, and how it's affecting families' bottom line across the country. But for many, their wages are not keeping up with the rising costs of everyday necessities, everything. But some folks are taking advantage of remote schedules to increase the amount that they bring in, and we're not talking about raises. Instead, they're working multiple jobs. It's called being overemployed. NBC's Isa Gutierrez has more.
The recent rise in remote work is arguably one of the largest business culture shifts since the advent of the 5-day workweek in 1932. According to a June McKinsey survey, there's now an estimated 29 million Americans opting to work remote 5 days a week. And some savvy remote workers are using the time they save commuting to get hired for more than one full-time job. They call themselves overemployed.
My gross between all the companies, it kind of varies based on bonuses, but it's approximately 1.5 million depending on the year. So I figured the more jobs I had, the closer I would get to retirement.
Tyler, who asked us to use an alias and alter his voice, says he's been overemployed for nearly a decade. He first started with just 2 jobs.
One company was remote, so I would have to go to the bathroom whenever I wanted to take a call for one company. But just over time, I ended up making it work.
Then came the pandemic and a shift to remote work culture.
The companies I was working for, they were pretty happy with my work. So I just kind of kept adding more and more jobs over time until I got to 11.
Tyler shared 11 of his most recent pay stubs with NBC News for 11 separate full-time jobs. And we can confirm that each company is real. The companies he works for are based across 10 different states.
I have a laptop for each company and 3 main monitors that I use. If you're not good at stress, then definitely you do not want to be overemployed because it can be very, very stressful.
Overemployment has only recently come under the spotlight, but the idea isn't entirely new.
This is the biggest open secret out there.
Isaac, who altered his voice for this interview to conceal his identity, runs overemployed.com. It's a website that gives tips on how to juggle more than one job concurrently. He says the movement has been happening in the tech sector for years and goes back even beyond that.
The whole industrial military complex built in this norms of working one job. Long before then, it wasn't just one job. When you were farming or doing carpentry, people were doing multiple jobs, surviving basically. That's the basis of the website, and why it was created was basically give other people the permission and the okay to pursue life, liberty, and happiness for themselves.
For most workers, this is perfectly legal. It would depend on the worker's contract.
Aaron Hatton is a sociology professor at the University of Buffalo that focuses on labor market and movements.
Most employees work at will, which means that their employer can fire them for any reason at all, any time at all, except for a few legally protected reasons. But if you're a great worker and they find out you're working for another employer and they don't like it, they can let you go today.
This is just one of the hurdles overemployed people face.
The biggest slip up that I've had is basically I'll forget to mute one job when I am on a meeting with multiple companies.
But as work culture continues to evolve, for some, the idea of going back to their normal 9 to 5 is out of the question.
So I would quit every job before I go back to an office. The only thing that they should really care about is, are you doing your work? As long as you're productive, I think that's what matters the most.
Isa Gutierrez, NBC News.
That's what we said. Original reporting on News Now. That is a wrap for our hour. We're going to have more for you here tomorrow. Same time, same place. Coverage, though, resumes right now.